Broad Street Review podcast is an extension of Broad Street Review, Philly's home for arts, culture, and conversation, an online arts and culture journal covering the greater Philadelphia area. I'm your host, Darnell Radford. Today on the podcast, R.Eric Thomas stops by to talk about the family-friendly, the ever-present, a piece that aims to shine a light on our collective history as the world continues to change. Here is my interview with R.Eric Thomas. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Darnell Radford, and today I am in the virtual studio with none other than R.Eric Thomas.
Hello, hello.
Oh,
it's so good to virtually be with you.
Oh my God, I was thinking that the last time we were in a vicinity together, in a formal capacity, and I think it was your book event.
Yeah, that was like the last time I was seen in public at all. It was late February 2020 at the Free Library, and that was fantastic. And as I said on stage, like I highly recommend writing a book because you go on book tour and you see everyone you've ever met. It's like a funeral. It's really lovely. And so that was a lot of fun, and the Philadelphia stop was, I only did, I think, 4 stops before everything else got canceled. But the Philadelphia stop was my second to last, and it was the biggest and was really a surprise. Just, I love Philly and I have a lot of roots there, but you don't expect that you're going to fill up that auditorium. I'm not David Sedaris. So it was phenomenal. So thank you for coming and hanging out. It was a good time.
Yeah. Well, we were certainly here for it. We had a great time. I enjoyed the book so much that I bought the hardback, and I also bought the audio version because I had to hear your voice. So no way I was going to get through that book without hearing you and all your inflections. So it was great. Very much enjoyed it. But today we're here to talk because you've been going nonstop. So tell us, bring us up to speed. Because we got lucky at that time. So many things were sort of buttoning up before we had this long intermission. But tell me, recap up until now. What have you been up to?
Well, it was very interesting. I was approaching what felt like a decision point in my writing, and I wasn't really sure how the book was going to do, and I was writing for Elle at the time, and but I was like, well, are things going to change? Is something going to be different? And then the pandemic sort of pushed, as for everyone, it pushed some things into the foreground and receded other things, and it became a more complicated experience writing a humor column about the news after March 2020. And so I did that for another 9 months or so, and then left Elle in December. But during that time, I took a little bit of a leave and I started writing for television. And that, I normally you have to be in New York or LA. But I did all this writing over Zoom. And so I wrote for a show called Dickinson on Apple TV Plus. And then yeah. Oh, I guess.
Wait a minute. Slow down. You wrote for Dickinson?
I did. I wrote for the upcoming 5th season.
Oh my God, we love Dickinson.
It was incredible. It was an incredible experience. I'm in this writer's room with Alina Smith, the showrunner, who's amazing, and Z-Way, who was just about to sort of launch and now has her own Showtime show, and Lynn Nottage. I log in on the first day of Zoom, first day of school, and there's Lynn Nottage, and I'm like, oh, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
I'm gonna go off camera for a minute, and I'm also gonna mute so I can freak out for a second. I'll be right back.
So that was phenomenal. That was a phenomenal first experience, and I love Dickinson, and I was a huge fan before I got hired to write on the show, and then it was just amazing um, to be in that space and to be able to sort of create in that world. And so I wrote a couple episodes for the upcoming season, which I believe is coming out in January. Um, and then when I left Elle, I wrote a young adult novel. That's a sort of a riff on Ferris Bueller's Day Off about two Black queer kids in Baltimore, and that's called Kings of B-More, and that'll be out in May. And then I wrote for a show called Better Things on FX. And during all this, I was also writing and revising and workshopping over Zoom a couple of different plays, including The Ever Present, which is what we're here to talk about. And Deborah Block from Theater Exile approached me. I guess it must have been while I was up in Philly for that book event, or maybe maybe it was even before. We met in person. That's all I know. So that puts a marker on it. And Theater Exile wanted to work with me, and they wanted to work on an all ages show about South Philly and set in South Philly and featuring the voices and stories of the area. And that was a really exciting thing for me. And originally I was going to write, I think I was thinking a lot about like climate change at that point. And I was working on a commission with Baltimore Center Stage that was originally about climate change. And then just things sort of changed. And I thought a lot about place and, sitting in my apartment in Baltimore, I thought a lot about place and rootedness and neighborhood and how we can depend on each other how we have to depend on each other when we live together. And so, I worked on The Ever Present over that period. And then I was working on a couple other different plays. I've got a play opening at the Arden in late January that we were workshopping over Zoom. And so it's just like a really fertile period, which looking back, like, you look at the receipts, you're like, oh yeah, you were doing a lot of writing. And like, it feels silly to say, because it's also like, I was also like spiraling like everybody else. I was like, I'm never going to write anything. Nothing is funny. And that was a real journey for the Ever Present. It was initially hard to figure out how to make something that felt like lively and magical and funny. And it took a lot of different iterations. I threw it all away multiple times and started with a blank page. But we finally got there, and it feels kind of like the Muppet Show, kind of like a Pixar movie, in that, I, as an adult, enjoy it. But I also think that there is a lot of life and magic and humor that kids and teens and, everybody else will enjoy too.
Yeah. So, so how does one write during a pandemic? There's so much going on, and I know that my brain is run a mile a minute, and I've had ideas, but not enough to, I haven't been focused enough to sit down and really flesh them out. I just know that this little tidbit is going to be valuable, so I will capture this and put it in the notes, and I'll get to it later. But for the most part, I'm like prioritizing some key things, like I got to go to work 9 to 5. I got to do that. I got to eat. I got to, reset and repeat.
Right.
And the other things I keep saying I'm going to get to. So how does one get into the headspace to be a full-time writer, during all of this?
Well, I mean, I wish I had a good answer for that, because literally every Wednesday I go to therapy and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. And it was a real, like, I don't know. I get a lot of joy out of writing, and I try and put a lot of joy into writing. And so one of the things that was really hard for me was reaching for and grabbing onto joy and putting it on the page. I don't have like a regular practice where I get up every morning and I sit down and I force myself to write. I'm a big fan of deadlines, because I'm like, well, something has got to go. Something has got to go out the door. And this is my job. But I'd be lying if I said that like I showed up at my job every day, like 100%. And so that's what was gratifying about this Theater Exile experience, is that when I turned in my first draft, I was like, I don't know what this is. And we had enough time to sort of figure out what it was. And the thing, and I got it to a place that like felt like, oh, I got a little piece of joy. I got a little, the story makes sense. It's fun. There's potential here. But then when you add actual people into it, added Brett Robinson, who's directing, adding the cast, that was what the thing that I've been missing. I realize even though writing is a solitary thing, I am somebody who needs to be sitting in coffee shops and riding on buses and walking down the street, running into people and having those sparks fire, to really feel like I'm writing. Otherwise, I'm just sort of like, what if a chair in a room, a theater? And I don't know that that's as interesting. So the getting to be back with people virtually at first, and then most recently, like in a very COVID safe rehearsal process, all masked and vaxxed and tested, really just changed things. I don't know. I wish I could be like a monk writer who just like goes away and it's like, who cares what the world is doing? But unfortunately, that is not where I live.
All right. There was a little bit of emergency here because there is a hurricane making its way up the East Coast.
Oh yeah, we are just it's just leaving here. So get ready. A lot of
It must
water.
have knocked on the door. It was like, "Hey, how's it going? Emergency notices everywhere." My audio went out for a second, but we're back.
Oh gosh.
Um, yeah. So I so I heard this a long time ago when I was listening to an interview with screenwriters, and the screenwriter said a deadline focuses the lights.
Hmm.
And I always, when I heard that, I was like, "You're right. That's right." Because I think about when I booked that venue a year in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Now the clock starts ticking, and I get to work. But
Yeah.
before I can book that space and say I got to put something in there, I'm just hovering,
Yeah.
saying like, "Well, here's what I can do," but until we know we have a deadline to reach, it does kind of force us to stop imagining what could be and start, you know, getting it down on the page.
Yeah. And
And
also you give yourself permission. I don't, it's hard for me to turn in something that I'm like, I don't think this is it. But when, the clock strikes and you got to hit send, it is, a collaborative process can be really forgiving. And I think most people, when they receive the first or second or 15th draft, they know this isn't King Lear. We're going to
mhm,
work on this. But that can be really hard, I think, for writers and any sort of creative to say, this is not perfect. This is not what it's going to be. But I've done as much as I can do right now. But until you give it over to somebody else or just release it in whatever way to get feedback and to help it grow, it kind of stagnates. And
mhm,
that can be, and I think that's really hard, especially, that was very hard early in my, both before I had a career. I was just sort of writing into a vacuum and I didn't really, and that's why I started doing solo shows, because it forced me to get something on paper and then put it up out in the world.
mhm,
A friend of mine once asked me years and years, I mean, probably 15 years ago, he was like, so you write like every night? And at that time I was like writing every night until like 3 a.m. in the morning. I was working on this like gay adaptation of Three Sisters, that is not good, unfortunately. But if I do turn it into something, then scratch that. But right now it's not there. And he was like, so what do? You just like write and you put it into a drawer? And I was like, no, I save it on my computer. I don't have a printer. Like, no, I don't put it in a drawer. And he was like, Eric, that's not what I'm saying. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with it? And so that question of what am I supposed to do with it kind of fueled
mhm.
me and still kind of fuels me. Now, where do we put it?
Yeah. I've been saying, so I use notes on my
Hmm.
phone because
Yeah.
it's on all my devices.
Hmm.
And what I realized looking back on let's see, what is it? The past, let's see, I've been doing this since 2011, I guess.
Mm,
So
mm-hmm.
yeah, so I'm looking at all this time where I've been adding all these notes. I've been creating a database of
Yeah.
ideas. So
Yeah.
now I can just go to search and just type in love and pull up
Mm-hmm.
every idea I had that, that revolved around love. And now I can combine those things, or I can see what like information, because you're very consistent with your ideas, but when you're writing them down, they seem so fresh and new. And you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
realize you're like, wait, I touched on this a year ago. And so now I can put all this together. It was like the best thing, because I'm like, I have this,
Right.
I'm not starting from scratch.
Yeah.
So, if anybody out there feels like they're stuck, just know that all of this you're putting down, as long as you put it down somewhere, it's going to be a valuable resource for you, because you're building your body of work.
Yeah.
And just because you don't have it out in front of everybody doesn't mean you don't have a collection in
Yeah.
place.
No,
Yeah.
that's exactly the way I feel. That's the way I wrote here for it. It was all these random notes from over a decade of thinking about stuff, and I was like, oh, that's something. I'll build something out of that. The show, the art and backing track, started off as a 10-minute scene that I just sort of like. I don't know why I wrote that little 10-minute play. I think I was at like a workshop or something. And so then it sat for a while on my computer. And then I had another idea for a scene. And so I just jotted down the idea. And then I had like a line. And then it was like the snatch of, a lyric from It's All Coming Back to Me Now by Celine Dion. And eventually I was like, and then, when Terry Nolan was like, hey, do you want to write a play for the Arden? I was like, I do actually. And this is the play that has sort of been like, I mean, I'm going to be like, no, I don't. Thank you.
No, I'm gonna
Um,
pass, Terry. Thanks.
yeah, thank you. That sounds really fun, but I'm busy that day. Um, but yeah, I was like, oh, I've got all this soup that's been cooking in my crock pot, and I'm just gonna
Mhm.
pull it out and strain it and see what's there. So
Yeah.
I always have to remind myself of it. I'm glad you said that, because I always have to remind myself every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, well, it's over. Every single day. I'm like, well, that was a good run, but you got nothing left.
Yeah.
But it's all in the notes app.
Oh, great. Um, okay, so the ever present.
Mhm.
Tell us about it.
It is. It is. It's set in on an abandoned lot in South Philly. That is a fictional lot, but it could be anywhere.
Pick one.
And
There's one right next door, probably.
there we go. Right, exactly. Look out your window. Look under your seat. There it is.
Look under your chair.
Right. And so all the characters are sort of bigger than life, both in the way that Philadelphians are bigger than life, but also bigger than life in a sort of theatrical, fun way. And it concerns this woman, Pashmina Paredes, who is trying to save the lot from being developed by a by a developer named Vernal Belch, who is going to turn it into it's a whole emporium. It's a barber shop for celebrity dogs, and a miniature golf course that's too small, and just all these ridiculous things.
Hmm.
And so
It's gentrified a
yeah, exactly. Yeah. An amusement park for tourists, like just sort of like the most ridiculous things. And so the action of the play sort of concerns, they have to fight Pashmina and Vernal to get to the stories of the lot, of the places, of the people who've lived on the lot. And so those stories come alive around them. And as Pashmina tries to spin those stories out, Vernal tries to erase those stories. And so the title really is about this idea that we are all, that our stories connect us, and even though they may be, things may be past and gone, our stories always keep those who came before us present, and the history of a place very present. And I was really, really interested in looking at the history of South Philly from a cultural standpoint, and telling stories that came from different cultural populations, from Black populations and Vietnamese populations and Honduran populations, um, and really amplifying the diversity of South Philly, and the idea that we can, it sounds, our current moment has made it very hard to be like, we're all neighbors, to have that not sound political. And I don't mean it politically. I mean it like we all live on this planet together, in these neighborhoods together. And that can be a really beautiful promise and a really beautiful opportunity for all of us, if all of us have a voice, um, and an opportunity to have a say in what happens in our neighborhoods.
Hmm. It's a wonder. I'd love to ask other writers, in the area, in the various neighborhoods, like how much of what they write is inspired by their very neighborhood that they live
Hmm.
in.
Yeah.
There is this mindset that you rent in the neighborhood, so you're not really connected to the neighborhood.
Hmm.
But then you get to a certain amount of time that you've been in the neighborhood, and then you start to feel as if you own. And
Yeah.
it's just so interesting, the way people end up in various neighborhoods, and you don't realize like what came before you.
Right.
Like, before I moved into my place, someone lived here for 10 years.
Hmm.
It was a husband and wife, and they moved because one of them passed,
Mm.
and the other could not live here without them.
Mm.
And so that story is with me,
Right. Right.
as I'm making this a home for myself. And I always tell everyone that I'm like, actually what happened here is I've been passing this place for a long time, and I never gave it a thought, and then it just showed up on the market.
Hmm.
And so you just don't realize how much is going on around you, that for one, in a selfish sense, is very story worthy,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
also would just make you appreciate where you are,
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah. I think that's such a fantastic point. Moving to Philly, I moved to Philly, I guess probably 16 years ago, and left about 3. So I lived in South Philly for about 12 years. And I moved in. We found an apartment on Craigslist, and we moved in above a cell phone repair store on South Broad. It was owned by a husband and wife. At the time, they later got divorced, and you could hear them sort of talking and arguing and joking with each other through the floor of our apartment. And then, they had their regulars that would come in, and then other people and kids from South Philly High coming in to get their iPhone screens repaired and whatnot. And we felt very much like strangers to this space and strangers to Philadelphia. And slowly but surely, we got to know the rhythm of the neighborhood and the sounds, and where to park and how to park. And, we'd go to South Philly Tap Room and all these other spaces. And I felt a real ownership. And now when I come back, I still feel, I lived in 3 different places in South Philly. I still feel that same ownership, even though places change. The
Hmm.
places that I used to go, B2 isn't there anymore, or I think it's changed owners. I think it's still there. um but the Acme is still there, and pardon me, excuse me. The Acme is still there, and a lot of the people that were there before are still there. And none of us are the first people to set foot on this space. And so that's why I love that, a lot of the theater community has adopted land acknowledgments,
Yes. Yeah.
and sort of just like remembering that so many people have tried to find their joy in this space where we are, um, and some of them with so much less uh, than what we have right now. That's stunning to me, and it's important to remember, because it can just feel like transactional. It can just feel like, well, I showed up with a check to rent this apartment because you have to, in Philly, and instead it's like, no, I'm part of a continuum, and that's exciting.
Yeah. And it is kind of interesting, since we're thinking about exile, I was thinking about the many conversations I've had that really, I Ugh, I should probably just work at Exile. I love Exile so much. There are just so many things that whenever I sit and talk with artists who are bringing something to the stage at Exile, I can reach into the various neighborhoods and see where the themes of this story fit.
Hmm.
Like we talked
Hmm.
about gentrification at a time where there was vandalism in the Point Breeze area for these new, these new homes that were being built for people who were not yet part of the neighborhood. And
Hmm.
we were like, who are these for? And it's like,
Hmm.
because no one here can afford these.
Right, right.
Um, and it's kind of interesting when people take on those homes, they don't actually live here. Not everybody doesn't live here. Like they own it. They Airbnb it or
Right,
something.
right.
They're not ready to move in. This is an investment. Whereas
Hmm.
other people are trying to make this a home and really trying to start building memories. So it's kind of interesting, especially when you're in the mindset of like how do you put your own roots down? And
Hmm.
then you see around you that people have a lot of temporary roots or just investment properties
Yeah, yeah.
in the very same neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think that can be a hard thing. It's funny that you talk about Airbnbs and people with temporary roots because I mean that's this play doesn't really concern Airbnbs, but that's like the central tension of backing track, my play at the Arden. I'm always thinking about belonging and how you belong in a neighborhood and who tells you you don't belong in a neighborhood. And the flip
Hmm.
side of that, how you communicate to a neighborhood, to a population that you are interested in community as opposed to you're interested in a transaction. Um, I think that's hugely important. And I think looking at people's motives for being in a space are hugely important. And there is fault on all sides, but there's also opportunity on all sides. And I mean that's kind of what the ever present is really about. It's a funny, silly storytelling um, adventure. I don't think a lot of like 7-year olds are interested in like talking about like gentrification, renting versus owning. So we don't get into it. But this idea of like who's right about what the story of the neighborhood is central.
Hmm.
And without spoiling it, it's surprise, surprise. There is something. There's a beautiful space that's not. I don't want to say in the middle, but there's a beautiful space of understanding um, that the characters achieve. That is not about paving paradise and putting up a parking lot
Hmm.
because our neighborhoods are essential. Neighbors are essential, and so that's the core of the play.
Yeah. So I always want to know about process, and I'll ask about time frame, not so that people can have an idea and say like, oh, this is going to take me a couple of weeks to do, but just to know, you know, from idea to table read or from idea to studio exhibition presentation. What
Mhm.
was the time frame like in the
um,
process?
it was, oh gosh, okay, so I think we must have started right before the pandemic, and so then I was noodling around with ideas, and I immediately was like struck by how difficult it was for me to sort of get into it. And so the first draft probably took, I don't know, three months or so. And then I completely threw it away and wrote a new draft in a couple of months. And um, and then we got some notes from Deborah, and I rewrote it again. And so I think from first draft to like or from idea to studio exhibition, it was probably about like a solid year, um, which I think is like both short and fine for an hour long play. Everything takes what it takes. There's been
Hmm.
some plays that it's taken years and years to sort of figure out, and there's some plays that I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote this in a couple months and I figured it out. And actually, is that true? I don't think so. I think time is on our side. Took Didn't take very long. Um, but everything else has been very difficult.
But I think what's interesting about you though is that you're always flexing this muscle. You know, you always have some commentary,
Hmm.
which is the exercise that allows for all of this to come through, and to hear that, even though we sort of check in with you very consistently, to still know that, this hour-long piece still took a bit of time, I think is really therapeutic for so many
Mm.
writers out here, because they do think that, I think everyone's working for their first draft to be their only draft,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they don't realize that they are creating a blueprint,
Hmm.
and the blueprint, will need to be seen and experienced by other people, and then those that feedback, has to be a part of this process, and you
Yeah.
can't get that until you lay the foundation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, if you look at it as, I'm only working towards the foundation so that I can get other people involved, so they can help craft this. So those ideas and life experience and everything can help craft the story to make it, you know, what it's truly meant to be.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, so I am sometimes that writer who's like, well, this first draft, this feels good. Let's put it up on stage. But with this, it was a lot of trial and error, but we did a reading, studio exhibition reading, I guess probably at the year mark, of I'd been writing for a year, and it still wasn't there. And I got some feedback, and we worked with the performers. And so that was another 4 or 5 months. And it really wasn't, it was maybe probably a month ago. So we're talking 18 months of writing that I finally sort of, based on some of the exciting things that the performers are doing, with the piece, that I finally like finish making changes. So yeah, we did like a workshop at the very beginning of, what month is it? August. And and then after that, I went home and I like rewrote like a good third of the play, and I was like, "Here's the play. This is it." So yeah, it was 18 months to get here, and I could have kept writing. Um, what I love about, one of the gifts of being in performance is that it stops being theoretical and starts being, uh, action oriented. And so it's like, well, this is going to go up on stage. So how does it work? And a lot of times writing can just be, what's a good idea? What's a good way of doing this? Which is fun and great. But at a certain point, you have to be like, somebody is going to say this, and they're going to ask you a question that's like, why am I walking into the room right now? And you have to
Hmm.
be able to answer that.
Yeah. So, do you follow any guides like the Story Circle or anything like that? Like, how do you how do you break your story? How do you find its
That's
roots?
that's a really good question. I don't strictly follow any guides. I like the story circle. I like Vonnegut's different, six structures. Um, when writing for TV and movies, I tend to reference Save the Cat a good amount. And um, it's interesting though. One of the things that I've tried to do with playwriting is sort of eschew a standard process, because TV and film are so process oriented that it's almost like with a film, like with a play, I can just be like, here's an idea I had. But at a certain point in development, I do get very mathematical about it. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
well, this is the promise that I made in the first scene. So the last scene and has to answer that. But yeah, I think if anything, I typically follow like Vonnegut structures, which are just really broad, and they don't sort of give you beat by beat or anything like that. Um, every once in a while, I think you should just try. I'm also so stubborn. Every once in a while, I'm like, Eric, just everybody's giving you a model. Marsha Norman, Dan Harmon, whoever, everybody's got a model. Just do somebody's model and see how you can write a play. And maybe like I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I need to get the passion out, because I need to catch the lightning in the bottle and then train the lightning. but
Hmm.
I find it harder to do in reverse.
Just there's so many notes. That was good. Catch the lightning and then train the lightning. um, so talk about when the director, Brett Ashley Robinson, got
Mhm.
involved and how their contributions really helped form what we're about to experience.
Well, first of all, I just love Brett so much. I just always feel privileged to work with her. Like she did a couple workshops of a play I wrote called Nightbird, which I really, really love. And nobody wants to produce, which is strange to me, but regardless. And then she did a couple workshops of backing track. And so I love her as a thinker, as a maker. I think she's so funny. And so when Deborah was like, "Who do you want to work with?" She threw out Brett's name. I was like, "Yes, absolutely." So what Brett has done is one helped the actors to embody these people, and making them full, like these are humans, but they're also humans turned up to like a 5, and so there's a level of, I don't want to say like formal clowning going on, but there is a level of, I really think it's Muppetry that she has really infused into the piece, and she has she she's given all of us, myself, the performers, the designers, this permission to create a world that is really like my sort of focus was like story and figuring out what the story was, and she took that story and put it up on its feet and made a sort of beautiful kind of tableau. And so this world looks and is has a vividness that she's added to it, um, that you know I think again, as a writer, like you hope, like, oh, I hope this feels um, lived in, and like a familiar family quilt, and that's what she's done with it. And she's also just like turned the funny up to like 90. Like there's a lot of jokes in the play, and it's I think it's very funny, but she and the performers have just found every possible comic moment. And like I went to watch her run the other day, and I was just like cracking up. And, like I sometimes crack up my own stuff, but like I was like surprised constantly. I was like, oh, this is hilarious. This is amazing. And that's Brett, and that's the performers. So
Okay, so you are hilarious.
no.
Very, very funny. And so how uh, are you convinced when you make yourself laugh that this is all it needs?
So when I write something and I laugh and I'm like, this is what it
Yeah.
is.
Are you like this is gold, they're gonna eat this up? Or
Well, it's
or
interesting.
do you laugh initially and then it just becomes, familiar to you and you move on and then someone else gets to experience that? Like, yeah, how
There's
being someone who is so humorous and
oh,
knows how to find that, yeah, how does it feel to you, after it's already on the page?
I think there's three ways that I write jokes. There's one is like, this is joke structure. I've written a setup, I've written a punchline. I know intellectually that that's funny, and sometimes I'd be like, haha, very funny. The second, I think, is sort of comedic potential opportunity. So like, there's a play I have coming up at the end of the in May of in Baltimore, where there's a lot of physical comedy, and so like I'll write, you know, a confetti cannon goes off, but I don't laugh at that on the page, but I'm like, I hope this works, but I won't know until Tech Week, which is a
Mhm.
very scary proposition. The third is the sort of wackadoodle stuff that I just think is ridiculous. And that's the stuff I laugh at every single time. And sometimes that stuff really works. And sometimes people are like, okay, that was indulgent. But it is the stuff that revs my motor. It's, if anybody saw Time Is on Our Side, the character of Mr. Ramundi is 100% that. And, just sort of wacky and weird. And this play is so much wacky and weird that and then Pax Ressler plays the villain Vernal Belch, and they're just phenomenal. And they've really embraced the wacky and weird. But like, I didn't write in the script like Vernal has a funny walk, but Pax has the most hilarious movements in this piece. And so that is sort of, that to me is this marriage of the wacky weirdness that I try to put into a script to amuse myself, keep myself interested, and then their translation of that, which continues to make me laugh.
Yeah, I want to go back to the studio exhibition for a second. Was that virtual?
Yeah, that was virtual.
And could you feel the piece virtually? Did you? Was it there virtually, or did you know that we have to be live? We have to be present in this space for this moment here. How did it feel virtually, and how did it change after you experienced it in that sense?
It's interesting. I don't want to say that Zoom is a truth serum, because I don't think that's true, but I do think that in the reading, there were moments that sort of jumped through the screen. There were character moments. There's a character, Vernal has an assistant, and that character really worked. And it's just like a lot of fun. And that sort of burned through the screen. And I was like, okay, fun, cool, got it. But then there are other moments that, like, the play involves, like, 3 sort of set pieces of oral storytelling. And sometimes that felt right. And sometimes I was like, am I sort of losing the thread because I'm sitting in my computer instead of sitting at a park and watching somebody bring this to life? But I did do a good amount of rewriting after the studio exhibition. And I think that was my fourth Zoom workshop, of 3 different plays, 2 plays I workshopped over Zoom back to back, with different companies. And so I sort of learned by that time to really listen and not watch, which is hard. And also to listen for the spaces that just feel like the energy has not been fully realized, as opposed, like, not like sort of I'm excited or I'm bored, but like the energy of the play isn't still burbling. So I think when you read something over Zoom, you can still get that energy, even if it's like a little flat. But yeah, it was really revelatory, that reading. But it's definitely a play that needs to be 3 dimensions zaniness.
So I know a lot of the work that we've been fortunate enough to experience over this long intermission, as we call it, has been outside whenever possible. Was it always clear that this was going to be an outdoor piece?
Yeah, this was conceived as an outdoor piece. Theater Excel has been exploring working with the Parks and Rec department for a little bit, and they did Whispers Gone by MJ Kaufman, and they did that outside. And so it was always, the way Deb approached me about it, she was like, this will be for all ages, it'll be about Philly, and it's outside, which was a real challenge for me. Like, writing for all ages is a very interesting challenge that's for me about calibration and making something that I think is entertaining, that is also accessible for children. And most of the time I write for adults, and I'm okay with that. But this was a different calibration. And then, like, the outside is a real mystery to me. I've never written anything for outside. And, sort of like, it really took a while to like break my brain open around like, what am I seeing? How does it feel? How does it sound? And so it was a little bit of trial and error there. But I think we got it. I'm a very uh, a wordy playwright. I love writing words. um, and that, I think there's another version of this play that is sort of more impressionistic and movement based and really just about an experience that you have outside. And because when you're sitting in a public park, if you're not amplified, it can be hard to catch a lot of witty repartee. But fortunately, we have Liz Atkinson, who is doing sound design, and all the performers will be mic'd, so you can catch everything.
Mm.
But that's something that I learned, and I'll think about. I don't really know. I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but yeah, I like to pack those words in like I'm being paid by the syllable.
I want wordy on a t-shirt. And as I heard you say I like words, I was like, I like bread.
1 year at Pride, I painted a sign that said I
I
love
like
bread,
bread. Yeah.
and carried it in the parade because Pride is about love, and that's what I love.
Yes. The pandemic has made parks and nature in general more desirable.
Hmm.
Um, what were we missing out on, in your view?
In terms of parks, or in terms of not
Yeah,
being. Oh, I don't.
before, when we weren't even thinking about we should do this outside. Like, what were we
Oh,
missing out on?
I love that. That's a really good question. Like, I think we have been seduced by the comfort and ease of being in a seat and sitting and looking at a proscenium and having air conditioning, and I think for some local theater companies, a building has been a bit of a curse historically. It's sort of like
Mm,
this is an albatross. And so, yeah, we don't live in an area of the country where we can reliably guarantee good weather. But we have been missing a sort of different relationship with atmosphere, with access, and um, with leisure. I think outdoor productions in Shakespeare and Clark Park, and Kitson could talk about this probably for hours. Um, there is a real democratization of art access, and also you have to throw some things away and say this is not important. This is not. It's not important to strictly uh, uh, follow this performance pattern or this design, but these other things are very important. Um, and it's sort of like I love sitting in a theater. There is nothing like being in close proximity to other people. And even if you're in a space where you have to walk downstairs for the bathroom and it's like taking your life in your hands. Um, but I think that we were missing the idea that you can get that same spirit of unity outside. It's like when I went to see Beyonce at Lincoln Financial Field. It's pouring down rain, huge stadium. Never been in a football stadium before. Why? What happens there? I don't know.
mm.
Um, and I felt such enormous energy coming from the stage and enormous energy going right back to the stage. And I felt connected
Mm,
to every single person there. And then when we got on the subway, that energy came with us, and the subway became the party. And then the
yeah.
streets became the party. And that is absolutely possible with theater. And I think that we miss that because, and I know that outside is not someplace that is always accessible for people. We have to make sure that people have the places where they need to sit based on what their or be or based on what their physical needs are, and we have enough sound and all the sort of awareness of people's bodies. But I think we miss the idea that we can. The theater can break out um, of break out of the building if we let it, and that's a really exciting thing to me.
Mhm. What do you hope the audience will take away from experiencing the ever present.
I think they love. I hope they love their neighborhoods. And if they don't love their neighborhood, which a lot of people don't, I hope they have come away with a curiosity about who came there before them, and an excitement about where they could be going next. I also hope that the audiences come away with a profound love for the five people in this play.
Hmm.
Uh, they like the performers. I mean, they are killing it. They're so good, and they're so fun. And so, and I hope that people feel, um, it's weird. We thought, some of us, I guess, thought that by this time we'd all be like buying our season tickets and getting our mink out of the cleaner or whatever and going back inside the theaters, whatever you do. I don't know. I've never been to a play, but but that's not it. But I hope they feel a little bit of a welcome back, and an invitation to imagine something, a world that's similar to the world we used to live in, but bigger and brighter and better.
Yeah. Well, I have two minks, and they're staying in the cleaners because we have outdoor theater. So
You'll need it in January, baby.
I will say that during all of this, I feel like the weather showed up for us. They
Yeah.
knew we had to be outside, and the weather was like, I feel you. I got you.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Got you.
So it was like, is this weather seasonal? Like, this is great weather. I
Right.
think,
Right.
so I felt like it could have been worse. We could have had such a hard time being outside, but I think that also allowed us to sort of return to
Mm-hmm.
nature and return to being outside and
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it more than aggressively wanting to be back inside. And I think that's why there's so much push and pull about the regulations and everything. It's like there were some people who were like, I'm actually comfortable out front here,
Yeah.
this is not a big deal, or I wasn't going over there anyway, but now
Mm-hmm.
you're rushing to cram inside and you don't want to, have all of that. So I am so glad that this is just like anything else where the artist makes adjustments, the
Mm-hmm.
necessary adjustments in order to properly tell the story in this moment. So
Yeah.
in this moment, we need more space. We
Mm-hmm.
need air and ventilation. So these
Mm-hmm.
stories are being crafted with that in mind, and we're thinking about it. And I I I wrote a note earlier. It said something along the lines of, you know, uh, artists always artists always feel like they need an abundance of space in order to create. When really, we kind of do need a box that has enough space for us to
Mm-hmm.
be creative in.
Mm-hmm.
So we do need space, but we do need some sort of parameters, or else we'll just go on forever.
Right.
So we need to be able to, like, okay, I have an abundance of space here, but I can't go too far. That's going to be a totally different story. You
Right.
know, so I always see that, and I'm always thinking about it. And how do they keep this story in the box that we can all comfortably exist in? And I always really appreciate that, and I think that's why I just process all of this on such a different level. And I always really enjoy having these conversations and
Mm-hmm.
learning about the journey of this piece. And I can't wait to experience this one. Uh, our schedule is sort of in flux, but I think during the run time, during the run of the ever present. But I think we're going to be able to join at the tail end of this.
Oh, yay.
Um,
Yay.
the
Yeah.
ever present, written by R.Eric Thomas, directed by Brett Ashley Robinson. This is presented by Theater Exile. It is running September 11th through the 19th, and it is free.
Yes.
Wow, it is
Yeah.
free.
Free. Completely
Is there
free.
any kind of like registration required? You just show
No,
up at
I
these
think you just show
locations?
up. Yeah. So it's in
So
5 different Philly parks. So you do want to check the Theater XL website
yeah,
before you go, or the
and
postcard.
I'll list to that here, but I'll tell you they're all in South Philly. It's Columbus Square, Dickinson Square, Wharton Square, which is my neighborhood, Stephen Gerrard Park, And it also goes back to Columbus Square and Hawthorne Park as
Yeah.
well. So there are opportunities. You'll see the schedule, and then you can come be a part of this experience. R.Eric Thomas, it is always a pleasure to chat with you.
Likewise. I miss talking to
There,
you.
I miss talking to you too. There's so much we say on recording, but there is so much more that we say outside. And I'm telling you, through the 12 seasons of Rep Radio, the 5 seasons of Broad Street Review, I always enjoy coming back to you to figure out where you are, and your artistic journey is so inspiring
Hmm.
and so uplifting. You always make me smile, and
Oh,
everybody else, everyone who follows you on all the various channels. It's always such a joy, and I'm so glad that uh, you just appear to have this endless well of ideas and stories. So if I hope this is your lot in life for your entire life, to just tell us stories forever and ever and ever.
oh my goodness. Well,
But
I hope so too. That's very kind. I really, you're such a such a beautiful spirit. It's so fun to talk to, and I do hope it isn't endless. Well, we'll see. When I come back for
yeah,
my next interview, I'll be like, well, that was it.
well, that well ran dry. I think you better jinx it. But then by the end of that, we'll have a story idea, and then you'll be
Mhm.
back. You'll be back at it. But it's the ever present, a world premiere theater exile presentation. Get into it. R.Eric Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time to unpack this with me.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
always a pleasure to have a chat with you.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Head on over to our website at www.broadstreetreview.com and click Get Involved at the top. While you're there, help keep us running and click Contribute to find out how. Connect with us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter at Broad Street Review. Thank you for helping to keep the conversation going.